At my own father's funeral, my stepmother, Brenda, physically blocked me from approaching his casket, her hiss of a voice telling me I was disrespecting the real family's grief. A week later, she stood before me again, this time barring my entrance to his will reading, a smug, triumphant smirk on her face as she declared that only heirs were allowed inside. She thought she had won. She thought she had successfully and completely erased me from my father's life, and now from his death. She had no idea that my father's final act of love was resting in the simple manila file I held in my hand, a secret that was about to burn her entire greedy world to the ground. The day of the funeral was a miserable blur of cold, driving rain and the cloying, heavy scent of lilies. The funeral home was filled with my father's friends and colleagues, their faces a gallery of solemn respect. I sat alone in a back pew, a silent, solitary island of genuine grief in an ocean of performative sorrow. At the front of the room, near the open casket, stood Brenda and her 2 children, my step-siblings, Kyle and Ashley. They weren't just mourning, they were holding court. Brenda, draped in expensive black silk, would dab at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief whenever someone approached to offer condolences, while Kyle and Ashley would flank her, looking stern and proprietary, as if they were the sole owners of this tragedy. I watched them for an hour, my heart a hollow ache in my chest. They were strangers playing the part of my father's family. I needed to see him. I needed one last moment, one final silent goodbye. With my legs feeling like lead, I stood up and made my way down the quiet carpeted aisle. I was 10 feet away when Brenda saw me. Her mask of performative grief vanished, replaced by a flash of pure, cold animosity. She stepped forward, deliberately placing herself between me and my father's casket. "What do you think you're doing?" she whispered, her voice a venomous hiss that was somehow more piercing than a shout. "I just want to say goodbye, Brenda," I murmured, my voice trembling. "No," she said, her voice dropping even lower. Kyle and Ashley moved to stand beside her, a human wall of resentment. "You've done enough. Your very presence here is an agitating performance, and it is deeply upsetting for us during this private time. This is a moment for his wife and his children," she put a gaze at Kyle and Ashley, "to grieve in peace. Please do not make a scene." To be told at my own father's funeral that I was the one making a scene, to be denied a final look at his peaceful face by this woman he had the misfortune of marrying late in life. The humiliation was a physical blow. The sympathetic, pitying glances from the few mourners who had witnessed the exchange felt like salt in the wound. Defeated, heartbroken, and utterly alone, I turned and walked back to my empty pew, the sound of Brenda's quiet, triumphant sniffles echoing in my ears. A week later, I found myself standing on the plush, soulless carpet of a downtown law firm. I wore a simple black dress, and in my hands I clutched a worn manila file. It had been delivered to me 2 days prior by my father's oldest and most trusted friend, just as my father's letter had promised. My grief was still a raw, open wound, but now it was forged with a cold, hard layer of resolve. Just as the prompt had described, Brenda and her children were waiting for me, standing like sentinels outside the polished wood doors of a large conference room. They had clearly been expecting me.
"Well, well," Brenda said, her voice dripping with mock surprise. "Look who it is. I must say, Lily, I'm surprised you have the nerve to show up. I believe Mr. Peterson's secretary must have made a mistake in calling you." Kyle smirked. Some people just can't take a hint. I said nothing. I just stood there, my knuckles white as I clutched the file. My silence seemed to fuel her confidence. She took a step closer, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of victory. Let me make this perfectly clear, so there are no embarrassing misunderstandings, she said, savoring every word. This meeting, she gestured to the door behind her, is for the reading of your father's final will and testament. It is a private meeting for heirs only, people who are actually named in the will. She paused, letting the implication land with its full, cruel weight. And since you are not one of them, you are not welcome. Goodbye, Lily. She turned, ready to lead her children into the conference room and claim the spoils of her victory. She believed she had locked me out, not just from the room, but from my father's legacy, from his memory, from his love. She thought the door was closing on me. She had no idea I was the one holding the key. The heavy oak door of the conference room clicked shut, the sound echoing in the sterile, silent hallway. From behind the door, I could hear the faint, muffled sound of triumphant laughter, a cruel punctuation mark on my public dismissal. I was alone, cast out. They were inside, ready to carve up my father's life, while I, his only child, was left in the hallway like a stranger. The initial hot sting of humiliation began to fade, replaced by a strange and profound calm. The grief from my father was still a raw, gaping wound in my soul, but another feeling was now layered over it, a solemn, steely sense of purpose. I looked down at the simple manila file I held in my hands, its weight feeling far heavier than a few sheets of paper. It felt like I was holding my father's hand one last time. My mind drifted away from the cold law office and back to the warmth of my father's study 3 months ago. The room had smelled of old books, pipe tobacco, and his familiar, comforting cologne. He was frail then, diminished by the illness that was relentlessly stealing him away, but his eyes were as sharp and clear as ever. He had been watching me, a sad, knowing look on his face. "She thinks I don't see it," he had said, his voice a soft rasp. I knew instantly he was talking about Brenda. "She thinks I'm a foolish old man. She flutters around me, all fake concern and sweet words, but I see her eyes. They don't look at me, they look at my possessions. She sees this family, this life I've built, as a corporation she is executing a hostile takeover of." She had sighed, a weary sound. "She brought me new estate planning documents last week, prepared by her own lawyer, Mr. Peterson. It was a masterpiece of greed disguised as practicality. It gave her everything, a reward for her loving care, and it left you with a pittance, a small token to remember your father by. She thought I would be too sick or too tired to read the fine print. He told me then that he had signed it. My heart had plummeted, a cold stone of dread in my stomach. Seeing the look on my face, he had reached out and patted my hand. "Shh, Lily Pad," he whispered, using his childhood nickname for me. "You have to trust your old dad. Her arrogance is the most predictable thing about her. It is the key to our entire plan. She must believe with all her heart that she has won. Let her have her victory. Let her believe she has outsmarted me." It was then that he explained everything. The will she had, the one that was about to be read in that conference room, was a decoy, a beautifully crafted piece of legal theater designed to lull her into a state of absolute, triumphant certainty. His real plan was something else entirely, a move of such quiet legal genius that it took my breath away. He had created a pre-existing, irrevocable family trust years ago, with me as the sole beneficiary. His true secret weapon was not a second will, but a legally unassailable, notarized, and witnessed codicil. It was a short, simple amendment to his original estate plan, a pour-over clause that upon his death would funnel the vast majority of his assets, his company, his stock portfolio, his properties, directly into the ironclad safety of my trust, bypassing the will entirely. The decoy will they were about to read would only govern the few assets left outside of that trust. It was a will for the scraps. My oldest friend, George, has the codicil, my father had explained, his eyes locking with mine, impressing upon me the gravity of his instructions. He will give the file to you a day or two after the funeral. Do not open it. Do not speak of it. Let Brenda have her moment. Let her bar you from the funeral. Let her lock you out of the will reading. Let her feel the full, glorious power of her victory. Then he had squeezed my hand. When she is at the peak of her arrogance, I want you to walk up to her lawyer, Mr. Peterson. Hand him the file. Do not speak to her. Speak only to him. A lawyer's first duty is not to his client, but to the law and to the truth of the deceased's final wishes. He will be legally obligated to review it. Trust the plan, Lily. Trust me. Tears had streamed down my face then. Tears of love, of sorrow, of overwhelming admiration for his foresight, for his fierce, protective love that reached out to shield me even from beyond the grave. Now, standing in this cold hallway, the memory of his voice was a warm cloak around me. I looked at the manila file. It wasn't just paper and legal jargon. It was my father's final hug. It was his last chess move in a game he had been playing against a greedy opponent for years. It was the purest expression of his love. The muffled sound of Mr. Peterson's voice began from behind the closed door. They were starting. Brenda was getting everything she had ever wanted. My grief and my hurt coalesced into a single point of cold, diamond-hard focus. I was no longer just Lily, the grieving daughter who had been pushed aside. I was the silent executor of my father's final, brilliant wish. I was the guardian of his legacy. I took a deep, steadying breath, my hand resting on the cool brass of the doorknob. I trust you, Dad, I whispered to the empty hall. It's time. I stood in the hushed, empty hallway, the only sound my own steady breathing. From behind the heavy oak door of the conference room, I could hear the low, monotonous drone of Mr. Peterson's voice as he began to read the decoy will. The performance had begun. I imagined the scene inside. Brenda leaning forward in her chair, a mask of feigned sorrow barely concealing her triumphant greed. Kyle and Ashley beside her, already mentally spending their inheritance. They were all so certain, so blissfully unaware that they were merely actors in a play my father had written, and the final act was about to begin.
My grief, which had been a wild, chaotic ocean threatening to drown me, had receded, leaving behind a shoreline of hard, smooth stone. There was no fear. There was no hesitation. In that moment, I could feel my father's presence beside me, his strength bolstering my own. I could hear his voice in my ear, a quiet whisper of encouragement. Trust the plan, Lilypad. Trust me. The manila file in my hands felt warm, a final, tangible connection to his love. I was not just his daughter anymore. I was his chosen instrument. I took a single, deep breath and began to walk. My footsteps were silent on the thick, plush carpet. It was the longest 10 paces of my life. With each step, I felt my resolve harden. The image of Brenda blocking me from my father's casket flashed in my mind not as a source of pain, but as a source of fuel. The memory of her smug, dismissive smirk just moments ago did not sting. It focused me. I was not acting out of anger or a desire for revenge. I was acting out of a profound sense of duty to honor the man who had loved me enough to plan for this very moment. I reached the door. I raised my hand, not in a timid tap, but in a firm, solid knock that echoed in the quiet hall. It was a knock that demanded to be answered. The drone of the lawyer's voice inside stopped abruptly. There was a beat of silence, then the sound of a chair scraping back. The door opened a few inches, and Mr. Peterson's face appeared in the gap. His expression was one of pure, undiluted annoyance. "Yes," he said impatiently, clearly irritated by the interruption. "I believe we were clear. This is a private." Over his shoulder, I could see Brenda's face contorting in a mask of apoplectic rage. She started to rise from her seat, her mouth opening to hiss some fresh venom. I ignored her completely. My focus was entirely on the man in front of me, the man bound by a code of ethics that superseded his client's petty cruelty. I met his gaze directly, my own expression calm and unyielding. My voice, when I spoke, was not the voice of a grieving, emotional girl. It was the voice of a commander, steady and clear. "Mr. Peterson," I said, my tone polite but firm, "my apologies for the interruption. My name is Lily Miller. I am Robert Miller's daughter." I saw a flicker of recognition and then renewed annoyance in his eyes. "Before you proceed any further with the reading of what you believe to be my father's final testament, I am formally instructing you, as an officer of the court, that you are legally obligated to review this document first. To fail to do so would be a grievous professional oversight." I held out the manila file. It was a simple, direct gesture, an offering and a command in one. Behind him, Brenda was losing control. "Peterson, don't you dare take that," she hissed. "That is nothing. It's a pathetic, desperate trick. Close the door on her right now." Mr. Peterson was frozen, caught in an impossible position. His client was giving him a direct order, but I had just invoked his professional duty. He looked at Brenda's furious red face, then back at my own calm, resolute one. He saw the cheap, emotional theatrics on one side and the cool, serious appeal to law and procedure on the other. He was a lawyer. At his core, he was a creature of caution and due diligence. He knew that ignoring a potential superseding document, no matter how unlikely, could put his entire career at risk. He made the only choice a true professional could. He ignored his client's screeching. His hand, as if with a will of its own, reached out and took the file from me. "Please wait in the reception area, Miss Miller," he said, his voice now tight with a new uncertain energy. I will review this." He closed the door, the solid click of the latch sealing them inside with my father's final surprise. I was once again alone in the hallway, but this time, everything was different. I was not the outcast. I was the one who had just lit the fuse. I had followed my father's plan to the letter, and now all I had to do was wait for the beautiful, inevitable explosion. I was guided to the firm's reception area, a plush, silent space with uncomfortable modern art on the walls and a large corporate clock that seemed to tick with agonizing slowness. I sat on a low leather sofa, the manila file now resting on the table before me, its job done. I was not nervous. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind only a profound sense of peace. My part in my father's plan was complete. Now I was simply an audience member, waiting for the final scene of his play to unfold. I closed my eyes and pictured the scene inside that conference room. I could almost hear it. Brenda's voice, sharp and furious. "What are you doing, Peterson? I told you to get rid of her. That file is meaningless. It's a desperate trick. Now get on with it. Read the will my husband signed." Then the calm, measured voice of Mr. Peterson, the professional, trying to manage his volatile client. "Brenda, please, let me just take a look. We must perform our due diligence." I imagined him sliding his letter opener under the flap of the manila envelope. Inside, he would not find a desperate, tear-stained letter, but a crisp, legally formatted document, a codicil.
He would read the first line and his posture would change. His professional curiosity would be piqued. He would see the date at the top, a date he knew was weeks later than the will he had on his desk. His eyes would scan the page, taking in the dense, formal language. He would see the clause revoking all previous testaments. He would see the references to the pre-existing trust, a legal entity he was likely familiar with. His heart rate would quicken. He would turn the page and see my father's signature at the bottom, familiar and strong, and beneath it, the signatures of two witnesses, my father's doctor and his oldest friend, George, men of unimpeachable character. And finally, the embossed, indented seal of a notary public, a stamp of undeniable legal authority. This was no trick. This was a bombshell. I imagined Brenda, Kyle, and Ashley watching him, their impatience growing with every second of his deepening silence. "Well," Brenda would snap, "what is it? What does that witch have to say?" He wouldn't answer her. He would be too busy rereading the document, his legal mind racing, understanding the catastrophic implications of what he was holding. He would understand that the will he was about to read was now little more than a historical artifact. My imaginations were interrupted by the conference room door opening. Mr. Peterson stood there, his face grim, his expression unreadable. "Miss Miller," he said, his voice now laced with a formal, strained courtesy. "Would you please rejoin us? Your presence is required." I stood up and walked back into the room I had been barred from just minutes earlier. The atmosphere was thick, with a toxic, simmering hostility. Brenda, Kyle, and Ashley were glaring at me, their faces a mixture of fury and confusion. I took the empty seat at the far end of the long, polished table, placing my hands calmly in my lap. I was no longer the outcast. I was the one who had just lit the fuse.
Mr. Peterson remained standing at the head of the table. He cleared his throat, a loud, nervous sound in the silent room. He adjusted his tie. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice formal and heavy, "I must apologize. It appears the document I was about to read is not, in fact, the final and binding testament of Robert Miller." "What are you talking about?" Brenda spat. "Of course it is. We were there when he signed it." "Yes," Mr. Peterson conceded, "but it appears he made subsequent arrangements. The document provided by Miss Miller," he held it up for them to see, "is a legally executed codicil to a pour-over will. It is witnessed, notarized, and dated October the 7th of this year, 3 weeks prior to Mr. Miller's passing. Upon my initial inspection, it appears to be entirely valid, and, as such, it legally supersedes the will I was previously reading." "This is ridiculous. It's a forgery," Kyle shouted, his face turning red. "That will be for a court to decide, should you wish to contest it," Mr. Peterson said coolly, his patience clearly gone. "However, my duty here today is to read the last known, valid testament of the deceased. And this," he tapped the document, "is it." He put on his reading glasses and began to read. His voice was a dry monotone, but the words were a symphony of my father's final, brilliant act of love. He read through the legal jargon, the clauses and subclauses, until he reached the heart of it. "Article 3, he read, "all previous dispositions of my personal and financial assets are hereby revoked. It is my final wish that all my major assets, including but not limited to my controlling shares in Miller Innovations, all real estate holdings, both domestic and international, and the entirety of my investment portfolio shall, upon my death, pour over into the pre-existing and irrevocable Robert Miller Family Trust." Brenda let out a short, triumphant laugh. "A trust? Fine. My children and I are the beneficiaries of that trust, Peterson. I made sure of it." Mr. Peterson looked up at her over the top of his glasses, his expression one of cold pity. "Actually, Brenda, you are not," he said flatly. "According to the final page of this codicil, it also contains a legally binding amendment to the trust itself." He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle before delivering the coup de grace. The amendment states, and I quote,
Effective upon my death, the role of sole trustee and the position of sole beneficiary of the Robert Miller Family Trust shall be transferred to and held exclusively by my beloved daughter, Lily Miller. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a universe collapsing. Brenda's smug, triumphant face seemed to melt. The color drained away, leaving her skin a pasty, sickly gray. Her eyes, wide with horror, darted from the lawyer's pitiless face to my own calm expression. The realization of what had just happened, that she had been left with nothing but the scraps, that she had been outmaneuvered, that the daughter she had tried to erase now owned everything, hit her with the force of a physical blow. She made a small, strangled, gasping sound. Her meticulously constructed world shattered into a million irreparable pieces around her.
The silence in the room was a fragile, crystalline thing. And then Brenda shattered it. A sound escaped her lips, a noise that was half gasp, half strangled sob. The pallor of her face was instantly replaced by a deep, blotchy, furious red. She shot up from her chair, her hands slamming down on the polished table, her eyes, wild with disbelief and rage, fixed on me. "No," she shrieked, the sound raw and ugly. "Absolutely not. This is a lie, a forgery. That little witch tricked him. He was sick. He wasn't in his right mind. She coerced him." She whirled on Mr. Peterson, her voice rising with every word. "I am your client. You work for me. You will tear up that piece of paper this instant and read the real will." Kyle and Ashley, jolted from their own shocked stupor, joined the chorus. "This is illegal," Kyle sputtered, his face puffed up with impotent rage. "Our mother was his wife. We were his family. We're going to sue you. We'll sue her. We will take every last penny." Through it all, I remained silent, a calm island in their raging storm of greed. I looked at them, at their contorted, ugly faces, and I felt nothing but a deep, profound pity. My father had seen this, all of this, with such perfect clarity. It was Mr. Peterson who finally restored order. He stood up to his full height, his expression now one of cold, professional finality. His loyalty was no longer to the hysterical woman before him, but to the sanctity of the law and the final wishes of the deceased. "Brenda," he said, his voice cutting through her tirade like a shard of ice, "my duty, first and foremost, is to the estate of my client, Robert Miller, and to the verifiable legality of his final testament. This document," he held up the codicil, "is sound. The signatures are verified, the notary is in good standing. Contesting it will be a long, extraordinarily expensive, and in my professional opinion, a completely fruitless endeavor." He let that sink in for a moment before delivering the final, crushing blow. "And you must understand, any legal challenge you mount will be defended by the resources of the estate itself, which as of this moment are controlled entirely by the new trustee." He gestured calmly towards me. The implication was clear. They would have to use their own money to fight a legal battle against the infinite resources of the very fortune they were trying to claim. The fight was over before it had even begun. And now I finally spoke. I rose slowly from my chair, my movements calm and deliberate. The power in the room, which had been so chaotically contested, now settled quietly onto my shoulders. It was not a weight, but a mantle, my father's mantle. I did not look at Brenda or her children. I addressed the only other professional in the room. "Mr. Peterson," I said, my voice steady, "thank you for clarifying the legal standing. Please begin the process of executing my father's final wishes as outlined in the codicil, effective immediately. Your firm's fees for your services to the estate will be paid from the trust pending my personal review and approval." Then, and only then, did I turn my gaze to the three people who had tried to erase me. "Brenda," I said, my voice devoid of malice or triumph, a simple statement of fact. "The will you hold a copy of still governs some minor personal effects. As stipulated, you will receive my father's second-best set of golf clubs and his collection of naval history books.
Per the terms of his marriage agreement, which supersedes any will, you and your children may continue to reside in the main house for a period of 90 days to arrange your affairs. After that date, the property will be legally transferred into the trust's name and will be prepared for liquidation. Please have your personal belongings packed by then. I let the cold, hard finality of their new reality sink in. I had not just won, I had read them the terms of their surrender. As for this meeting, it is now over. You may see yourselves out. They stared at me, their faces a mixture of hatred, shock, and utter defeat. Without another word, they gathered their things and shuffled out of the conference room, a broken, defeated family. Their dreams of a vast inheritance turned to dust. I remained behind with Mr. Peterson, the silence of the room now peaceful. He looked at me with a newfound profound respect. "Your father," he said, shaking his head slightly in admiration, "was a brilliant man." "Yes," I said, "he was." Later that evening, I sat alone in my father's study, the room where he had first entrusted me with his plan. I held the codicil in my hands, his strong, familiar handwriting covering the pages. At the very end, below the legal signatures, he had written one last personal note. "For my lily pad. If you are reading this, then my plan has worked, and I am so sorry that it was necessary. Know that this was never about money or possessions. They are just tools. This was about love, and my solemn duty to protect the life and legacy we built together from those who would see it dismantled for greed. You were the greatest joy of my life, my proudest achievement. Now, live a good and happy life. Build things. Be kind. Make me proud. All my love, Dad." Tears streamed down my face, but they were not tears of grief. They were tears of overwhelming love and gratitude. The fortune was a responsibility, one I would manage with care and integrity. But the real inheritance wasn't in a bank account. It was in that final note. It was in the boundless, strategic, and fierce love of a father who would reach through time and law and grief to make sure his daughter was safe. He had won the final battle for me, and my vindication was simply in knowing that I had been worthy of his trust. A brilliant plan from a loving father and an unforgettable story of justice being served. What do you think was the best part of the father's final plan? Let us know in the comments below. If you loved this incredible story of a daughter's vindication, please show your support by hitting that like button and be sure to subscribe for more daily stories of epic revenge and karma. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.